Welcome to the Bicurian podcast, where we explore and embrace the seeming contradictions of life. What actually is Bicurian, you ask?
Well, you may not necessarily have a mental concept of Bicurian, partially maybe because it's a made-up word. You embody it. What's happening right now in terms of the divisions between us is a focus on that which is different.
And lack of understanding and empathy for people's beliefs is no longer an excuse.
And it is in the differences we carry in ourselves that we find the Bicurian moment.
When you really dig into something, you're going to see some depth to it. It's not just a race thing. It's not just a conservation thing.
It's letting go of the or to make room for the and. We embrace all of you. Welcome to the Bicurian.
Hi, I'm Eric.
And I'm Aisla.
Welcome to this week's show.
This week's show is Civil Discourse Over Dinner.
Yeah, so we started having this conversation based on the fact that the holidays are coming up. People are going to be seeing their family.
Or other people they don't tend to see on a regular basis.
Right. And maybe you can give a little bit of background as to something that recently happened to you.
I could do that. So something you mentioned is that the climate of modern America is a lot of families are being somewhat torn apart around mostly political issues. And I had the experience of posting something on Facebook that my sister took personally. And when I reached out to her, when I realized that had happened, she blew up at me. And we've always been on very different parts of the spectrum politically. And this is the first time this has ever happened where she's lost it on me.
So I think it's safe to say, because I've had several experiences talking to friends and family on my side, not me directly, but them having some sort of a falling out with another family member or a friend over politics right now. Like, we live in an incredibly divisive world in the political arena, and for some reason, now more than ever, it almost seems like you're more prone to run into some sort of stop talking to each other for a couple of years scenario over holiday dinner.
Yeah, and I wasn't willing to accept that. Like, it took me a week or so to gather my courage and call her. I'm not interested in living in a world where my sister and I aren't talking because of some weird random thing on Facebook. And the conversation went well, partially because I focused on the fact that I love her. I said, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why this is upsetting.
But even mending that bridge, you've sort of agreed to disagree and not probably bring that stuff up, and it's still weird.
Oh, yeah. It's not. I was a little embarrassed, too. I've always been pretty proud of my family. I talk about a lot that we're really different and we don't ever have issues. And we are able to talk about things. So it really was quite surprising to me that there was a large reaction to something that was so random. And it made me definitely reevaluate in terms of, I don't have any problems with her faith or her political beliefs. I don't see any issues with the way that she's doing her life. And her engagement with me brought out maybe she has issues with how I do my life and just has never said anything.
Well, she seems to obviously be feeling it more enough now.
Yeah.
I mean, we do this podcast. It does have the social justice slant to it. We try to be balanced in our viewpoints, and our premise here is to look at things from multiple viewpoints and understanding things from different angles. And that's not something that a lot of people can do, nor would I make any claim that we don't probably come across from a certain point of view, no matter how hard we try not to.
We have our bias.
On certain things, we do.
We have our bias and we have our perspective. And at the same time, the goal is constantly to check our assumptions. And I'm hopeful that definitely there have been times when people have listened and responded, and we've kind of added some things to that, whether it's been on a blog or Facebook or whatever. And hopefully that will occur more. I'd really love to have that conversation with folks. And the conversation that I actually brought it up on Facebook that I was kind of engaged with, or the questions I was engaged with in terms of prepping for this was, if you have people in your life that have vastly different political beliefs or ideologies, how do you keep your relationship honest and also keep the relationship strong and connective? So not pretending, because I feel like that's kind of what I ran into with my sister. Like on some level, it seems like based on the things that she was saying, she's been pretending when we've talked about things. Whereas, with my dad, it's different. Like he's really clear. Like we have different beliefs. I don't always agree with your life. Like we don't get into it. And he's very clear that he has a different perspective and I'm clear with him. So it doesn't feel dishonest and it still stays strong and connective. And I'm like, oh, with my sister, maybe it hasn't been honest. Maybe I haven't known that, or she hasn't shared it. Or maybe, like you said, it changed. Who knows?
Well, and again, I think it's really hard to not feel the pulls to extremes right now.
There is a lot of extremism. And you're right. Like there's this feeling of it's so easy. And that's for me part of why what we do is helpful. It's so easy to get into a mindset and then to realize, oh, wait a minute.
Right.
There's more going on here.
Yeah. So with that, and in the spirit of that, we've investigated some tactics to prevent anyone from blowing up Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner.
Or Kwanzaa.
Or
Passover. Or
exactly.
Whatever.
It's a time for families. We should probably be able to get through those moments feeling pretty happy and not necessarily arguing. And as we see our friends more around the holidays and stuff, sometimes it could be hard for this stuff not to come up. And sometimes you find out that your friends supported something you didn't realize and you can get impassioned about it. So the way that we wanted to approach this was to just have everybody think about non-confrontational ways.
Or to recognize. So as I was going through, I put out some questions. For example, what if sharing my beliefs is core to my identity? So, like, I recognize that talking about my religion or politics or a political appointee or whatever, I recognize that might be dangerous. And this honesty part, I don't feel like I can be honest if I don't actually express those feelings or those points of view in this situation. And so for me, that would beg the question of really recalling, for example, that most of us don't do particularly well in a large group situation if we feel embarrassed. It takes a fairly enlightened person to be able to acknowledge that something they're saying might be ignorant or harmful if they're, in front of a bunch of people. They want to save face, or it's just an instinct to protect yourself. So if you have something, like if you're at the dinner table and somebody says something, you can note that and then take them aside at some point. Say, let's go for a walk and express curiosity. Like, where did that come from? Do you know this other thing that I'm experienced with or whatever? Instead of creating the tension at the dinner table where they're less likely to actually take in what you're saying.
Well, you brought up something when we were talking about this earlier. People like to testify.
They do. They like to testify.
And it could be their views on the Word of God, could be someone's views on racism in our culture right now, or
the Me Too movement,
or even just being very diametrically opposed.
Yes.
To certain people who might be in power right now.
Exactly. And all of those things, in a lot of ways, are expressions of faith.
Right. And your beliefs.
That's your beliefs. It's your faith. That's what and testifying of that it's a powerful experience. It's a passionate moment.
Right. And just like you might feel offended at something somebody says, especially if they're impassioned about it, recognizing that other people might feel, equally put off by your views, no matter how much you believe them and how much you believe that they're right. And the minute you make that assumption, how can nobody else see and understand what I'm seeing and what I know to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. And it's rarely a great idea to try and convince people to think like you or to change their minds. Interesting point of fact.
Hard not to do that for
Right.
some people, though.
Well, we all get caught up at different times. And I would say, so this interesting fact, as you know, mentioned many times, The Hidden Brain is this podcast that I love. And one of the episodes they had was Romeo and Juliet in Kigali. And it was a story of genocide. And the study of genocide. And there's several things about it. I won't go into all of it. One of the things that they learned through this study of genocide and then an application of a test to almost overcome genocide is that while people rarely will change their views, they will often change what they do. So we can get caught up in, I really want you to think like me because then I think you'll act like me. And that's actually not so much how it works. It's the actions, the behaviors that we take on are typically the result of what we have determined is socially acceptable. So right now it's socially acceptable to blow up at people and cut them out of your life. So people do this. There was a time when that was considered to be socially unacceptable. You don't cut people off. Ditching family was a dramatic and uncommon gesture. It was a punishment. Now it seems to be like our daily life. Everybody's got someone in their family they don't talk to. So it's also something to realize that trying to convince someone to believe like you actually isn't, if your goal is to live in a world where people behave differently, that's actually not, it's generally not effective, and it's also not necessarily going to get you what you want.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would agree. I think that, again, that's where the whole idea of testifying kind of struck me, because usually when people are testifying, they're explaining the various different things that they want to do and make people understand their viewpoint to the point where, the universal truth of whatever your position is on anything is revealed.
Well, you said something earlier when we were prepping about the importance of sharing stories of how you're participating or engaging and things that you're doing to create the world you want to live in as an alternative to testifying, if you will, to the rightness of a certain position. And I thought that was a smart approach.
I do feel, and it's not a righteousness, but I do feel like in my day-to-day life, I'm doing more. I have a stance on certain things, and I have beliefs in what I feel is right and wrong. And I get on here and I do try to present a message that people can dissect, take apart, think about, or whatever. I'm not even trying to change minds. I would like people to think more critically. That's my goal. But in the end, you and I both volunteer for different organizations and groups and try to stay involved and do different things like that. And so for me, it's less about what I believe and more about what I'm doing.
And I just think that's really powerful. And they've, that's the old saying, right? Actions speak louder than words. And, I have this friend I've told you about who, it's really funny because around the election 2 years ago, he wasn't even, fervently for a candidate that I didn't like. His online expressions around it, I found to be sort of mean to people. And I just realized I didn't want to participate in that. And so I unfriended him on Facebook. And I don't frequently do that reactionarily. Like I feel like that's it's not an important world. And then I wrote him an email and I was really clear. I said, I unfriended you on Facebook and I just want you to know that it's because I don't feel like our digital relationship is particularly functional. However, I really like you as a human in the world. He's the guy who shows up. Like he's a great neighbor, even if you don't live near him. If you've got a couch to move, he'll show up. If somebody's sick, he'll bring them soup. Like he is a kind person who is dedicated to the helpless and his family. And how he shows up online is not that way.
Well,
and I just realized like I wasn't liking him anymore.
That's a whole nother, topic. I feel like the anonymity of the internet, it becomes a sounding board to throw your ideas out there and to take more fervent stances than most people would do in person.
Yeah.
The flame wars that happen, there's a reason you don't actually see them happening at a party or whatever. But we are getting to that point now.
Mm-hmm.
At your, dinner, family event or whatever. It's starting to happen more.
Yeah. Well, and just to me for that, really realizing that a digital relationship could impact negatively an in-person relationship, and that I wasn't even blaming him for it. I was simply recognizing that my view of him as a person was changing, and I didn't actually want that to change because I really liked him. He's a good guy. And I did recently refriend him, and so far we're doing great. However, in the last 2 years, we've spent plenty of time engaging in life. And I felt like that was a really great way for me to approach it in terms of not making him the bad guy. And that's another, I think, tip for engaging with people who come from a different perspective is giving yourself a chance to really see them for who they are. Like
instead of their random Facebook posts.
Instead of the random, or, if you're at dinner and somebody, makes like my uncle, I've written a blog about my uncle who passed away a couple years ago. And he was a crass and kind of judgy guy. And yet at the same time, he was the first person to like literally he would give his shirt off his back for someone in need. Like he was a show up, participate in the community, no one goes home hungry kind of guy. And I feel like in some ways a politically correct movement has maybe lost us something in terms of recognizing that sometimes people can deliver a good service with a bad attitude. And whether they have a good attitude or a bad attitude, that person is still fed or sheltered, or the older person's walk is still shoveled. Like it doesn't have to be packaged in a pretty way to still be a benefit or a service.
Absolutely. I would say that, if there's anything that I've taken away from just having this discussion that led to us doing this show, it's to understand what it is to be compassionate and look past beliefs and see if you can see the compassion in the person you're talking to.
Yeah.
Regardless of how they might front.
Right. And there's definitely that feeling when you don't feel safe for whatever reason. And it was interesting because we did this podcast a few weeks ago that I was super proud of. And I shared it with a friend of mine who's quite conservative, and we're still quite close. And he loved it. And he said he wanted to share it with his kids because he wanted them to know that not all social justice warriors were full of hate. And I thought, wow. When I talk to my lefty friends, they're like, blah, blah, blah. The conservatives are so full of hate. And it's just so interesting to me that the two perspectives really view that these other people are just full of hate, and they view themselves as being practical and compassionate and hardworking. And it's just a moment of pause for me, that when somebody's saying, blah, blah, that person's full of hate, that, I know social justice warriors are not full of hate. And I also know what he's talking about.
Yep.
And so I'm like, okay, that's good to know. That's good to remember.
So, in the spirit of this, we did some research and came up with some basic recommendations that you can actually put into practice and hopefully avoid some of these kinds of pitfalls. So, starting on that list, number 1, stick to non-threatening conversations.
Yes.
Expand on that.
So if you really want to have a family experience that is less likely to erupt into any kind of tension or argument, stick to things that are shared experiences, like the weather or the holidays or family matters or media that you all love, sports that you follow, those kinds of things, pop culture, instead of the more incendiary topics like politics or religion. I don't, there was one of the recommendations on the article where I read, so don't talk about sex at your family dinner. I just feel like that's probably generally more comfortable.
Right.
I had this moment, I read that. I'm like, I cannot really picture sitting down to Thanksgiving with my dad and my sister and being like, so what, how's your sex life? So I'm not sure what they mean by that.
And I could even see some parallels to that if you are of an LGBTQ plus slant.
Yeah.
Talking about deeper things involving your relationship with family that is comfortable or uncomfortable with that could qualify as forcing people to think about what your sex life is like.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, and
not to say that you can't be comfortable in who you are, but approaching that from a way that's not confrontational is also okay.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I came up with in terms of, what if sharing something about politics or religion or I guess, the person I'm with in some way is core to my identity and, smaller groups rather than a large dinner conversation is probably better. And then the other thing I really think is important is to review for yourself why you want to be with these people. And if you have a desire to be connected with them and you recognize that your lives are quite different, are you willing to make some compromises to allow the connection to be the most important thing? Or is there some part of you that is invested in going to whatever this gathering is and proving a point or, getting to judge them? And if so, maybe consider not going or recognize that it's not going to be pleasant and accept that that's your choice. You're choosing that.
Yeah. Well, and that does bring up the second point, which is don't take the bait.
Yeah.
I grew up in a household with a stepfather that liked to antagonize. And he would antagonize anyone he could find. He would intentionally bring up inflammatory topics. I don't know to what end, because all it ever did was make everybody uncomfortable. But the minute you bite that hook, you're pulled into it. And avoiding that situation, I think, is very key to maintaining the peace. There's likely to be somebody in everybody's life that wants to tug on the string and get a rise. If you fall for it, now you're playing their game. And likewise, pay attention to what you're doing. Don't be the baiter.
Yeah.
Don't bring up the subjects that you know are going to inflame people just to prove a point. It goes both ways. Don't take the bait, but don't throw it out there either.
Right. And the third one I really like is admit when you have stuck your foot in your mouth. So if you accidentally pop bait out on the table and you realize, that was not what I meant to do, step up and say, I didn't mean to do that.
I didn't really want this entire conversation to revolve around politics or my beliefs.
I really am interested in spending time connecting with my family. If anyone genuinely wants to talk about this with me at another time, I'm happy to do that.
Exactly.
I screwed up. It's always okay to say that.
Which leads us into the fourth point. you can always guide the conversation back to safer territory.
That's true.
And it can be tough. We're impassioned people. I imagine that people listening to us might consider themselves that way. Um, you have a friend who said a quote that I still love and I think about all the time. Don't let yourself be defined by your enemies. And in that regard, if making your impassioned argument is because you're raging against the unseen forces that you have no control over, understand that inflaming things at a family or friend event is probably not going to further that cause in any way.
And the last one that they have here is, if you must bring up a tough topic, do so with compassion.
Yeah.
Consider the people that you're with.
And that their viewpoints might be different, and that doesn't make anyone, as we were talking about earlier, a bad person. Just maybe slightly different on viewpoints.
Well, and there are people that I love very much and that I interact with and I value as humans in my world that I don't spend as much time with. And I know it's mutual because we're just different enough that going outside of the places that we meet creates a lot of not just discomfort, agitation. And I value the connection and I appreciate different perspectives in my world. So I don't want to damage that.
Absolutely.
So,
And I think, one final safety measure, it's always safe to suggest we all play a card game.
it's always safe to suggest, or a game. In my family, cards are not allowed. So I'm just saying.
Which, some games can cause just as much fervor. My family has a history of playing a very violent version of a card game that involves slapping and possibly hurt hands.
And this may be how your family avoids tense topics.
We don't usually have a tense topic. We just end up having some cards slapped down.
There you go. So, and then there's a system called LARA, the LARA method. It's from nonviolent communication. If someone is talking about something and you're feeling a sense of, I do really want to participate in a way that's positive or connective, and we are on opposite ends of the earth here, it's a really great approach. And basically the LARA method, LARA is short for listen. So someone starts talking, you listen. And you listen until you can find something you can affirm. So for example, when it came out to my dad, he was very unhappy that I was identifying as a lesbian. And I could listen to him as he talked about it and finally get to, he was actually really worried for me. He was worried for my safety, that he didn't think the world was safe for gay people. And I was his daughter. And I could affirm that. I had kids. And say, I really understand that, Dad. I would be scared if my kids were doing something that I didn't think was safe. I appreciate that you care about me, right? Like I could affirm that. And at that point, we are actually connected. So I'm not connecting with him on coming out or being gay is bad. I'm connecting with him on, I understand being scared that someone you love might not be safe, right?
Right.
And then the R in LARA, respond, is then you add information. So usually people go from listen to respond. They don't do the affirm. And the affirm is actually a really important part of a positive.
Because you're acknowledging the point they made.
Not just acknowledging the point they made, but you're acknowledging something you can genuinely connect to. Sometimes it means listening for a long time. I mean, a really, really long time, because you have to find something you can genuinely connect to, not just give it a nod and a wink, right? And then the response is where when I say to my dad, okay, I can hear what you're saying and I understand that. So I can respond to what he's talking about and make sure we're on the same page. You mean the safety thing? Yes. Okay. And then the last part of it is the add. So LARA. So adding would be, in that example, I would say, okay, I understand that. And I think the world will be safer for LGBT people when more people come out and more people who are dads and siblings and moms stand up and say, this is not a thing. I can add that. And doing it that way, like if I just started there, if he said that and I just started with like, you're making it worse because you're not supporting me, that's really confrontational. But walking through that process of affirming, responding, and then adding, it actually ends up being a much more connective conversation. And because the person genuinely feels like you're listening to them, they will match you and genuinely listen to you. That doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to change their mind. However, their compassion is going to be out and they're going to feel a sense of safety in being genuine. So you can have a much better conversation about the whole thing. And it doesn't tend to get as fractious and rancorous as another kind of conversation.
Yeah.
So it's a really great tactic. You can look up nonviolent communication. I'll put it in the show notes, of course.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's link to that, and everybody can read more about that if you think it's going to be important. And to end the entire thing, I think it's very important to bring this up. You are allowed to be impassioned about your beliefs. That goes to me and you and our listeners. You're allowed to. But think about if the forum where you are with friends or family is the right place to express that passion. Is it going to really have a positive impact? Is it going to do anything positive in that moment? So this isn't about giving up your desires to do good things and believe the way that you believe. But it maybe isn't the right forum for that.
Right. And I do want to say I'm not encouraging people to stay silent in the face of things that they find to be.
If the racist uncle is going off, you could maybe say that's not appropriate. I'm uncomfortable by that.
Right. You can respond in a way that sets a boundary. And I think that's important. I think that there's a balance to it. And like you said, like making it personal in a certain way, that makes me uncomfortable. Can we
I statements are always good. I statements are always good.
Yeah. I just never want anyone to feel a sense of like I'm encouraging them to not stand up for themselves or for the things they believe in. And also to figure out like what is their priority? Is their priority getting on a platform with a point of view, or is their priority connecting? And if the things are staying in a safer zone, maybe just enjoy that. It's a few hours once a year.
I completely agree. So with that, we wish everybody health and safety and happy holidays, and hopefully a lot less arguing.
And a lot more connecting.
Welcome to the Bikerian Moment.
Yes. So my moment is a little bit in line with the topic of our show, which is we can love problematic things. So, I think about stuff like spending time with people that I really care about who are on a different place in the political world and who genuinely believe things that I have a very strong conviction are damaging.
You have always impressed me with the fact that you can get along with people in that way, and it's inspirational.
Oh, thank you. and just to recognize that and it's a constant question. Like I've talked to you about, or I showed you that show, Hannah Gadsby's Nanette. It's so amazing. And, she makes the point that, Picasso did some things that were pretty horrific. And then people say, separate the man from the art, except
But
no,
cubism.
But cubism. He's like, but nobody ever owns a Lego, whatever. They own a Picasso. Like, you can't actually separate Picasso from his art. He is his art in a certain way. And so I think it's a constant question of what is sort of lovable, right? And problematic. And how important is it to say, okay, actually, this goes too far. And I think it's a personal situation for everybody.
It's about your personal boundaries.
It's about your boundaries, and it's about your beliefs, and it's about the impact that you believe something has or your experience of it. And yet also, I think, giving ourselves a break and saying, okay, yes, there's a bunch of stuff going on here that ideologically is conflictual for me. It's problematic, and I still love it, whatever that looks like. And so that's just I think another point to make for me to remember. I don't have to be so extreme. None of us has to be so extreme. One thing doesn't have to mean another. There's not these black and white if then statements around the things in our world that matter to us.
Yep.
And sometimes, sure, you have to draw a line and say this steps over it. And I feel like in a certain way, people are quick to do that because of the discomfort of working through the mess and the challenge of the different things that are going on is pretty big. It's pretty big discomfort.
Yeah.
So,
well, the advice would be define your boundaries with what you really feel like you can do and make your choices around that and stand by the courage of your convictions in that regard. But if you choose to admire Picasso's art in spite of the fact that he may not have been a great man, that's okay. Just understand maybe what the distinction for you is. Appreciating art is a thing. And you're not by any means appreciating what he did that may have been questionable.
Right.
So.
That's mine.
Mine is a lot less fun, but.
No, it's not. It's a great one.
So, also in line with the show topic, we brought up being at dinner and getting through that and then just crushing massive meals. I would like to remind everybody that just because it's the cold winter months and the holiday season, it may pay not to wait until January to stay a little bit active. I was reading about some recent studies that not exercising can be worse for your health than smoking. And a lot of people don't tend to think about that stuff. And I am a little bit of a physical fitness buff. I am a cyclist and have always enjoyed a certain amount of physical activity. It helps my mental state. It helps me with focus. So I sleep better on the days that I work out. And just in general, it's been great for my health, mentally and physically. But in general, don't necessarily use this time of year as an excuse to blow off some of that stuff. Yeah, relax. Let it go a little bit, but try to stay active. You will come out feeling better about yourself and maybe less guilty about the situations you got yourself into.
Pumpkin pie.
And I fully admit that I love food. And so working out for me does give me a little bit of flexibility in what I can do and not feel bad about when I indulge. So,
and you know a person that hosts an annual fondue party.
That's true.
Which is not what I would call low calorie.
No, not at all. So, just a PSA.
It's a good one.
Stay active if you
can. That's another really important thing around this time of year is it's easy to get sedentary and to indulge in all the delicious.
And then come January, join the masses in the idea of suddenly undoing everything. Whereas it's a lot easier to just sort of be doing that all the time than to try to undo it.
Yes,
on January 1st. So that's mine.
If you have ideas, feedback, thoughts, please find us on social media. Bicurian on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or give us a call at 720-507-7309 or email podcast@bicurian.com.
And if you do think about it, please give us a review. It really does help with getting our podcast noticed, and we really appreciate that.
Have a good week.
Thanks for listening.